The other lamps broke. Cord on it dry rotted, started to crack. I didn't notice it until I happened to step on the cord one day. A tiny little spark came out of a crack that was right next to my foot, where it evidently interacted with some of the fuzz coming up out of the rug. Imagine if I had stepped just about 2 inches over. I don't know if I was barefooted. I would have gotten a shock. So I bought a kit to rewire it and all that stuff. I just don't like fooling around with stuff like that. I mean, I know how to do it. That stuff's not hard. I've got some tools. It's like this apartment is full of half-begun projects where I bought the tools or the materials to fix something and I just didn't get around to fixing it. I guess that's why I need a wife. So, internet, give me a wife. And then she can make her honey-do list, withhold sex and whatnot to get me to do things like that, to fix the lamp. That's the only way I can figure to get a wife, is make a heartfelt request like that on the internet. Anyway, it don't matter, you don't have to see my face. I have plenty of videos out there with my face on it. I just thought I'd talk a little bit about Sacramento. This picks up right after I left Yosemite. To finish that story up, you have to register with the park rangers when you're there in Yosemite. And I guess that's just so they can keep track of people. And if they find some hiker that's gone off in the woods and broke his leg or something and couldn't get back to civilization, died out there in the wilderness, they'll have some idea of who it might be. Makes you feel real warm inside, that does. But, so when I first got up there, fortuitously, I don't know whether it was by luck or design, chance or design, that I ran into this guy who was just real nice, kind of outgoing, kind of personality, real talkative, talking to me, and I think right away he kind of spotted that I probably was not the typical tourist. I don't think I looked real bad, but I had on these kind of funky looking cutoffs, blue jean shorts, and probably crazy wild looking hairstyle and beard and all that. Probably not as clean as some of the tourists coming in there. Although I wasn't particularly dirty, I didn't get all filthy and walk around that way. Just hadn't showered in a few days, and clothes might have looked like I wore them for about a week. And so he come up to me and started talking to me, and I forget where I was, maybe at the store. So I think maybe I had $1 or two. And he was saying, "Hey, how you doing? You got a shower yet? You want to get a shave? It's like $1. I'll take care of that. Come on this way." And he kind of took me under his wing that way and invited me to have dinner with his family. And I think maybe I slept indoors or in his tent, maybe. But he also arranged that I get a camping spot there. All you have to do is basically register an empty spot that you're going to be there and tell them how many days and that kind of thing. And they had what they call walk-up camping spots, which the difference was, I guess, is some of them you drive to and you can just park your RV there or pull out the open up tent part of the camper, or actually throw a tent, pitch a tent. But in the walk-ups, you didn't need to do that, and or you could, like, pitch a tent if you wanted to, but some people just chose to lie out under the stars. I think it rained there a few times. It wasn't as dry as Southern California. I don't think it was real rainy either, so it wasn't quite like the northern part of the west coast there that they call it a rainforest. It wasn't that bad. And this was summer, so it wasn't terrible cold. Even the nights weren't too bad. So sleeping out on the stars wasn't terrible as long as it wasn't raining. And if you had a little plastic, which I think maybe I had gotten some plastic too. I had a little small sleeping bag and some plastic. Could wrap up in. You could wrap up in the plastic and be relatively dry. And so he helped me get all set up there and told me about the deposit thing, where if you pick up cans and bottles, in all of the national parks, I believe it's true, it's like a nickel a bottle they give you. Now back then, that was a little more serious money than it is now. A nickel doesn't go too far now. And I'm not sure that might have been increased. It might be a quarter now. But think of it like a quarter would buy you now. It's what the nickel meant then, 1981. Picking up, cans and bottles here and there within a few hours, 3 or 4 hours maybe, of walking around the camp area, the valley area of Yosemite, picking up cans and bottles. I got probably, I don't know, some days maybe $10 worth of cans and bottles, and you turn that in, and then you can turn around and buy a 12-pack. I think I could get a 12-pack of beer for $3 or $4, and a pack of bologna and a loaf of bread, and I don't know, some cigarettes if I need them. I use rolling tobacco then too. It's cheaper than cigarettes. Top, that was my favorite brand. I didn't like Bugle. Is it Bugle? Bugler. Bugler. Bugler was too shortcut. It was chopped. Top was longer, stringier, and it allowed you to roll it. You see that? Lay it in the paper and you could roll it easier if it was long and stringy. Drum is that way too, and drum was even a little better preferred, but it was more expensive. Top was affordable compared to drum or buying a pack of cigarettes. It was a lot cheaper than buying a pack, and you got more. And so for that $10, oh, and I think you had to pay for your site, so that was 50 cents. And although you pay for your shower, it's like a quarter or 50 cents. I just went and bathed in the Merced River every day, so. And a lot of times I just go in clothes and all, so both me and my clothes were getting the grime washed off with a 10-minute swim in the river. It's so cold. I remember it was middle of summer. Days would get hot. Days would be 80s, 90s. I don't know if it got it quite to 100, but it was very warm. And but this water was running off from the Yosemite Mountains, from the, I guess it's the Sierra Nevada mountains that go along there, but the mountains of the Yosemite Park, and some of those were still snow-capped. They're snow-capped year-round. So it's cold enough in the snow-capped areas that the snow didn't completely melt, would stay partially frozen. And then I guess as you went down the mountainside to the warmer and warmer lower elevations, some of the snow that reached down that far was melting, and some of the runoff and whatnot would be close to freezing. And it wouldn't take, just a few minutes maybe to run down from that height. But say it took an hour or half a day, it still was pretty cold. I guess it was less than half a day. It probably took a couple hours, but it was still nearly ice cold by the time it got to the Merced River down to the Yosemite Valley. And so it was cold, cold, cold water. It was still cold by the time I got to the Yosemite Valley, so when I jump in there, take my morning bath, it'd be so cold, my whole body just freeze up. I'd just be like all rigid. And slowly I'd start to kind of move and try to get myself moving again and blood flowing. And after a couple of few minutes, it would get to where I was kind of used to it and could swim around and have fun, splash around. And then by about 10 minutes, it had gotten cold enough, slowly seeping into my body, the coldness, that I started to shake again. I started to get all rigid and froze again, and I had to get out. It was like painful and like I was cold to the bone. You know, I guess probably not after too much longer, maybe another 10, 20, 30 minutes of swimming around like that, if I stayed in there, if I could have, would have possibly led to hypothermia or something like that. I mean, I don't know what that takes. But if the water is, say, 40 degrees and you're in it for 30 minutes, I think that affects you pretty harsh. Be right rough to stay in there long. So anyway, 10 minutes was long enough to get thoroughly drenched and wet and washed off myself and my clothes. And so I did that every day, and was kind of able to skirt around the idea of showering and bathing. And I had a beard, so I don't think I shaved. And washing my clothes. I didn't have to wash my clothes by washing them in the river while I was wearing them. And then part of that morning I'd spend looking for cans and bottles, and then part of the day I'd go exploring. I wish I'd taken more of the hikes. They had all kind of paths, trails you could go, some of them up to where some of the waterfalls fall down to the valley. Some of them are real long, beautiful waterfalls. One particular one I remember was called the Bridal Veil Waterfall. And then I think there was a couple others, maybe one near El Capitan, seemed like it was, I don't remember. Yosemite Falls, I think, is a separate one. Probably 3 or 4 or 5 of them right there that you could see from the valley floor, normally. But this was the end of the summer. This was like late August, maybe early September even. And so, although the weather's still hot, it was starting to change back over to cooler. But the thing about the end of the summer is apparently it's drier up there in Yosemite. Maybe that's why it didn't rain as much too. And so most of the waterfalls were dried up. They said during the spring and I guess maybe early summer they are flowing. You see the waterfall. And maybe that's because it's just starting to melt that lower ice and snow that I was talking about. And so they're real pretty. They're famous. They're all in pictures. You got all kinds of pictures. You can look for Bridal Veil Falls or Yosemite Falls, and 2 or 3 others. And they're beautiful, but I didn't get to see them. I could see where they were supposed to be. I could see the rock formations. And that's another thing about the valley there that's really interesting, is that it has real sheer cliffs, a lot of it. And they say it's where the glaciers way back in the Ice Age is, I don't know, 200,000 years ago or something like that. The glaciers had come that far south and had carved the valley that way. So I don't know. That's a little hard to believe, but something caused it to happen, and maybe that much ice and pressure and friction over eons, because the Ice Age lasted for thousands of years or something, so maybe that's what that kind of force of nature can do. You would think maybe if that's so, there would be little Yosemite valleys all over the place, and they aren't. Yosemite Valley is a very unique valley. It's very unusual because of the way the cliffs are so sheer just in that one spot. And so that makes me think, well, maybe the stone that was there, some of it was softer, and that got it started to where even after a while the softer rock became harder along the edges. You had the soft rock in the middle, and then toward the edges is granite. A lot of the cliffs and mountains in Yosemite are granite. They know that. And that's real hard. So that's another reason it's kind of hard to believe that it was just a glacier that did that, but maybe so. Like I say, if it was soft where it started in the middle, the river, and then kept on expanding, maybe that's how it happened. But whatever reason, relatively sheer cliffs were carved along that valley there. And that makes it real good for rock climbers, people who like to free climb. I guess they call it free climbing, free rock climbing. It's where you don't have the rope above you secure and come down that you can like rappel. Now a lot of them do that rappelling going down. That's where once they get to the top, they may secure a rope that they can rappel back down by that, I think. But a lot of them climb up without that rope. The ropes they use, and they do use rope, are tied to them. It's a safety rope. And as they reach up and find different handholds and whatnot, cracks, crevices in the rock, and they've got guidebooks. I didn't know this. They're guidebooks that tell you where these rock crevices are along certain climbs, famous climbs. If you climb El Capitan, there's probably 10 different rock climbing paths you can take up the face of that rock formation, that cliff. And they're in the guidebooks for rock climbing, and it tells you where to put your pitons. The piton's that little chisel spike that they drive into the crack. They got a little hammer, a little chisel, and they drive that chisel into the crack. And then they got the crampons, I think they call them. It's that little hook thing with the little trigger part to it that you clamp that onto the piton, onto that little wedge you just drove up in that rock. And then you can go a little further up. And as you go further up, if you do slip and fall, you won't fall but so far, because where you get the rope in that piton on that wedge in that crevice, it'll catch you. That's the theory. I don't know how it all works. You gotta look that up for yourself. If you're interested in rock climbing, it's a great sport. It's very athletic, very difficult. You have to be lean and mean and tough to do it. And it's dangerous. You could get hurt. You could get killed. So always do it safely if you do decide that's what you want to do. But it's a great sport, and it'd be great fun for some people. People from all over the world would flock to Yosemite National Park, to that valley, to climb those cliffs. They're very famous for rock climbing. Half Dome is one of the most famous cliff faces probably in the world. And I think I've described it. It's where there was a full dome, but when the glacier came by and carved it out, if that's what happened, it carved off half of the dome. Where it was a whole dome, it carved off half of it. And so now if you look at it, and there are lots of famous pictures that show you that, it's half of a dome. And people climb up that rock face, that half side that is like a cliff. It's real sheer. I don't know. I've met people from Japan, I met people from Germany, I met people from England, I met people from Australia, Belgium, I forget, another half dozen places from all over the world that came there specifically to climb those cliff faces. And that kind of made it neat at night in the walk-in campsites. A lot of these people were young adults like me, maybe late teens to 20s, mid-20s. And they were had a vacation on a shoestring budget as tight as they could make it, some of them, just to be able to get there. And so they were staying in the walk-in campsites, just like me. Like, I don't know, it was 50 cents or $1 a night, something like that. And so it was fun at night talking to them, and there'd be campfires and people cooking their dinner or roasting hot dogs or marshmallows and singing songs and playing guitar. A couple of people brought guitars, and I got to play the guitar a few times and sing-alongs and stuff, and it was a lot of fun. Drink a few beers and share a few songs. And then you'd be so tired from walking around all day, it was easy to sleep. I think that's maybe the difference between when you're younger and when you get older and lethargic and fat and lazy and sitting around and try to sleep you up 3 or 4 times in the middle of the night. But enough of my problems. Anyway, so that was a lot of fun being there in the valley and that kind of social spirit, and just beautiful trees, the huge tall sequoias, same branch of the tree as the redwoods. These were, I think, just called sequoias. So they may have been a specific genus or scientific name for that particular species of sequoia. I think sequoia is the family name, and I think redwoods are also sequoias, but they're a little bit different than the ones that are there in the Yosemite Valley. If you go up the northern coast of California, there's the Redwood National Park is where a lot of the redwoods are known to be. But they're all really tall trees, and they go up 100 feet, 200 feet, and almost no branches low down until you get up 50 feet or 100 feet in the air, and then the canopy's all up at the top. It's all the last 20, 30, 40, 50 feet at the top of it's where all the leaves are, because when you got a bunch of these all together in a forest, the shade from those top leaves blocks everything below 100 feet to where it's all shaded down toward the bottom. So if they can't get light, then they have to grow taller, and the only leaves that pop out are up there near the top where there is light. Well, leaves need the light. That's what they do. They pull in the sun's rays and perform photosynthesis in order to translate that into the food source that helps the tree live. That's the whole thing about plants. If animals could perform photosynthesis, we wouldn't need to eat trees or plants or animals. We just get it from the sun.